Does CPK measure short-term or long-term variation, or how is it actually linked to this whole process performance? Well, that depends on how you set it up, not just the formula. Hello, I'm Tom. Welcome to my channel, where we make operational excellence practical, and we'll be diving into a pretty typical Six Sigma topic today. We will be going over process capability, and we'll do the machine capability, the process capability, and the process performance, also known as the Cm, the Cp, and the Pp. And we also have the K versions of them, and I think the most well known is that Cpk, the process the process capability, and then also immediately already checked for centering. That's basically the one that most client companies will ask for when they ask for something. But it's a tricky one, and we'll get into that. The thing is, I have quite a number of clients who, when I discuss these topics, they're confused. You know, what then is that machine and process and capabilities and the performance, and then you've got the differences, and not per se how the formulas work, although even that, we'll go over it a bit, I've got them written out here, but also what does it then mean? And that is a main thing. So let's go over that. And first of all, we should understand that any of these capability indexes, they work by checking your process output compared to your specifications. So if we are measuring our process, and let's assume that generally when we do check our process, we take 4 samples, and then, you know, a batch later, or a day later, or an hour later, whatever time later, we take another 4, we take another 4. This is basically just how we do our control routines. I know there's plenty of other setups, but let's take this basic example. What then are those sort of indices doing? Now, as I said, this is just the time. I did draw this one sort of in the average, at least, of these measurement points, but for any of the capability indices, we need to know what our specifications are. So let's just say that they are here. Right? We have a nice bandwidth, but you already see the average that we have of our measurements is a bit on the low side of the specifications. It is still inside, but low. That already gives us the, so this is where you're going to use the difference between the process capability and corrected for centering, right, with the centering coefficient K. That will come back in the formulas as well. So basically what we try to do is, you have this, what is my process doing? Right, so what's the spread in my process? If we take only this last one here, which is nicely centered, which is well within all of the bounds, or on purpose, based on this, if we assume that there is a more or less a normal distribution, we would assume that this is like the normal distribution of what comes out of our process. Does that fit within our specifications limits? Yeah, it does. In fact, it's nicely centered. It's, you know, it has some spare room on either side. When those 3 standard deviations, the usual way we draw one of these bell curves, when the 3 standard deviations, when they fit well within the specifications, then you know that your capability indices will be more than 1. And how do we see that? Well, look, plus and minus 3, that's 6. 6 standard deviations. If the difference between the upper and lower control limit is more than 6 standard deviations of your process outcome, then we've got a positive capability index. And in traditional terms, that would mean the process is at least capable. Now, there are people who would like to have it at 2 times. I've got a whole video on, should you aim for 1.33, 167, maybe 1.5, maybe 2, but at least it's more than 1. That we can agree on. I mean, no matter how high you would want to put it, more than 1 is always nice. Or we check how centered it is. For this, the formula gets a bit more text, but not that much more complicated. Bear with me. We take the minimum of either the difference between the average here and the upper limit, or the average and the lower limit. So in this case, they're basically the same. Upper limit is slightly closer, so we'll take the upper limit. And then we suddenly divide only by 3 standard deviations. And yet it is exactly the same concept, the same idea, right? Because we're only looking at one side, either the upper side or the lower side. So comparing one of the two sides to 3 standard deviations, that is of course equivalent to comparing the full range to 6 standard deviations. If your process is nicely centered between your specification limits, then, I see I put control limits here. These should be specification limits. Let me just sort of correct that with a red marker. I've been in statistical process control so much over the last month, like doing trainings, and these of course are specification limits. I will do it with a black pen. Specification limits. And that is, when it is centered, they are the same. When it is not centered, then you will see that in this case, the lower end is much smaller than the higher end. In fact, the lower end sort of extends beyond our lower specification limit, so it doesn't even hit 1. This is about 2, but here we've got 0.8, 0.9, something like that. Because we choose the lowest of these two, the minimum of the two differences, that's what you get. So you see that this range is basically the same. That formula would have just said, 1.33 in either case, but the formula with the centering coefficient, basically the formula written this way, makes it a difference. That is the difference between all of the normal but not usually used process capabilities, and these with the K, with the centering also taken into account, which really is more suitable when we're talking about what are we delivering to our customer. But you do want to know this one for your own process analyses, to know, can my process theoretically get between the specification limits? Because generally moving a process is relatively doable. It's almost always a lot easier than taking variation out of a process. So these are useful to calculate as well. But then this machine or process or performance of the process. And they use the same formula. I know that in my previous video I put the S here and then the delta, the sigma, the S and the sigma that we have right now. But that is more, it's a mathematically nice and correct way to, well, it's not even mathematics, it's more of a convention to really say, well, we're calculating it in a different way, and that is correct. But basically what you do is the same. So you estimate or you calculate the standard deviation. But it is about what sample and how do we split up that sample are we going to use to make this calculation. So here the standard is, if we are talking about a machine capability, right? So the machine, centered or not, we take 30 consecutive samples. So we do something like that. We start at the line, make sure it's running nicely, and as soon as we say, oh, it's basically stable, you try to do this without changing your material batches or stuff like that. So just make sure you're a bit at the start of a material batch, and you just take 30 products off the belt. And those are the ones you're going to be checking and then determining how much variation is in there, what is their standard deviation. What you do then is basically by taking those 30 samples consecutively, you're checking if my process as a whole has as little variation as possible. We're not changing the operator, we're not changing the materials, we're not changing the settings. It's the same time of the day. Everything's the same. Purely the machine working. Right? So when the machine is just doing its thing, how much variation do we see? And now I know this is slightly more than just the machine, right? If there is a little bit of variation throughout the material batch, this affects it. If you basically inside your line have 2 or 3 or 4 sublines that then converge, that can give you variation. There's all kinds of reasons why there can be variation. We still call it the machine capability. But basically, this is just the best situation we can get variation-wise. Then those other two. Right? So when we take our friend, the Cp and Cpk, so what we do is we do this. Right? So we basically say how much is in here, but we do something that is interesting. We will take the average of all of them. So we do say, well, we've got this is the average, right? So our average line, but this is our spread. So and for this you usually use formulas to estimate, because 4 is just not really enough to calculate a standard deviation. So you estimate based on the range. I think under the hood Minitab will use all of the sums squared of the difference to their own internal average, and because they take a much larger population, it will still work. I think they do a variation analysis, but I'm not even completely sure. When you do this in Excel, you sort of manual. When you do this manual or assisted manually, then you take the D2 values table, and if you then have 4 values in your subgroup, like in this example, you take the D2 value for subgroup size 4, and that's what you divide the range by. And so what this does is it will basically say I have my average, and if I check these ranges, so I'll take that shape, so this is going to be the resulting average with sort of this as my standard deviation, right? And we'll use this set to calculate stuff here. So over here we had the average, it is that one at the standard deviation. Here it is a bit bigger, with the average being there. And so for the Cp and the Cpk, the Cp will take that and see, does it fit within here? Yeah, just like here, right? Because they're all basically the same distance. So it'll be that same 3 plus and minus standard deviations, so these 6 standard deviations. Does it fit inside here? It does, about 1.3 or so times. Then when we go for the Cpk, it says we'll take these 6 standard deviations, or actually, let's just check which side is closest. Average to closest specification limit. So these 3 standard deviations, how well do they fit within that? Oh, oops, they don't. Now, it's not on the wrong side of the specification limit, so it is still positive, but this fits in about, what, half, maybe 0.3. So the Cp was about 1.3, the Cpk is about 0.3, pretty poor. Why is that? And it's good that it's poor, because this here is what you expect as a percentage of problems, sort of. But that's not completely fair, because we know that this whole batch was one big problem, and half of this batch was also problematic, and these were okay. So that's why, for basically your clients, what they like more is to go for the process performance, or they should like that more. Because here what you say is, okay, well, take the average again, and the average is going to be the same, right? So let's do it over here. The average is going to be that same average of everything. But now, instead of taking these 5 subgroups and checking the range, then no, we'll take all of them, and we're just going to calculate the standard deviation of all of these points compared to the middle line. That's quite a bit bigger. That'll be something like this. So it has a much larger standard deviation. Does it fit within my specification limits, my 6 standard deviations? No. This will be maybe 0.6 or so, 0.6, 0.7. If we check it with decay, so if we also take centering into account, of these 3 standard deviations, we're getting in what? 0.15? Now, that is what you get number-based in this example. But in the beginning of the video, I said, so this is then short term. Well, that depends on your subgrouping. See, if you actually go to the line and you take 4 products immediately, then your sampling plan resembles machine capability. So what you're basically doing then, if you take your 4 samples almost immediately, one after another, is you say, I'm going to take the standard deviation that fits with, machine capability, and the only difference is I'll check the average over time. So the CP and the CM in this case will be almost the same. Well, I made the machine capability really tight, but they will be very comparable if these 4 samples are indeed taken basically at the same time. But if you choose a different approach and you say, well, we make batches of the same product, and a batch is a couple of hours, half a day, whatever, and we just take those 4 samples a bit randomly over the course of a whole batch, then suddenly this range or that standard deviation is the standard deviation you have within a whole batch of your products. So that's a completely different time scale. Do you see why it is so super important that you know how you set up your sampling? It's, by the way, also the reason that I don't really like the CPK as something that a customer should want. Right? If they demand that, they should also come and together with you check your process, your sampling protocol, and what you're actually saying. Because a CPK that is based on 4 consecutive or parallel measurements done once a day doesn't really tell you so much. If these are indeed throughout a batch, that tells you a lot more from a customer's perspective. From your perspective, inside your own company, you want to know which of these you are using, because they can all be really useful, but you need to see what you want from your process. What do you want to know about your process? And the process performance, that one indeed takes everything into account all of the time. Is that better for a customer? I think so, because basically they just want to know, what am I getting? But even there, it depends. See, if you run, especially if it's known that the product can change consistency or some characteristic from time to time, many natural type of products. So you're getting a batch of grain, right? Do a bakery or something like that. The same, by the way, also goes for, gypsum or for any ore type of facility. If we have a truck of grain coming in that is slightly higher in protein content, we can change our recipes a little bit to it, and then for this batch, with slightly different parameters, get the same nice quality product out of it. But if it changes within a truckload, then it's a problem, because we just set our process and go with it. So for such a process, it may be very useful to check a CPK, if you know that your sampling is over one batch. But if you just want to have a plant that is, we set I forget is a bit, but we set and forget this setting, and we just want to be able to use it for any batch that comes in, then you need to be thinking of your PPK. So know what you are doing. Do you ever use the machine capability? Well, yes, definitely. See, that is the start of what you're doing. The machine capability, and also sort of the process capability, but the machine capability is the first one to start checking if your specifications are realistic. Right? If your line cannot produce within specifications, and that's especially also without the centering coefficient, then probably don't even offer the product in the first place, because you're not easily going to be able to make it. You are going to be in a world of pain trying to then get within those specifications. It's something that your sales team might like, but I guarantee your operations team will not like that. So that's one of the good reasons. If you want to know where your problem is, right? So you see that you have variation. Let's see if it is really in the core of the process, the machine capability. If it is more because it just jumps up and down a bit, or do we within a batch also see a big difference? So by setting up your sampling protocol in a good way, first having 30 at least consecutive measurements to know what can my machine do, and then setting up the CP and the PP with using this subgrouping a bit throughout a normal logical batch, right? I basically never suggest that you do this sampling at the same time. Well, never, there's always a reason. Now, but when you can do, but this is much better for statistical process control, this type of subgrouping, is when you do have your 4 lines within your machine. They sort of in parallel make the product, but you expect that maybe they have slight difference between the 4 of them. You take all 4 and you also check what they can do in the range, and then probably you take samples a bit more often than once per batch. But as I said, better for statistical process control. For just checking, is my process capable? Go throughout some logical time unit. And the process performance, it takes into account the entire set, basically. Here also, if you know that you have seasonal changes, you may or may not want to include that into your calculations. Right? Predictable changes to the center line of your process, they can be managed. Now, is it ideal? No, of course it's not ideal. You would like your product to be exactly the same year round. But if we're working with all kinds of natural products, or with stuff where our ingredients or the production process is influenced by the seasons, that's what you have. But you have to understand these things before you put that into action. So I hope that this sort of helps with that concept of how is CP, Cpk, Pp, Ppk, how is that different? And how should I do the sampling? Because I can guarantee you, if you look this up, Minitab has a very nice explainer article on their website about the concept, but they don't explain those subgrouping choices. Right? So they will tell you basically what their software does and what the formulas do, but then it is so important to know, is this one moment or is this my whole batch? What's included in my entire process? Do I do this over a year with seasonal influences, or do I sort of mean a day? Important things to take into account when you set up these types of studies. As I said in this video and in previous videos, when your customer demands a certain CPK or PPK, the best thing is to invite them over, have a bit of a chat about it. What do you really want? What is important for your, or actually better, go to their plant, see their application. What are they doing with your product and what is important to them, right? Good chance that they just need to implement a CPK because the manager told them, and just part of their certification now or part of the supplier programs. But if you know what is the reason behind it, then you can work to actually give them the quality they want. And then it can be super useful. But you saw how many variables are in these pretty simple formulas, that if you change your sampling procedure a little bit, your time frame a little bit, you get wildly different results. So be aware of that. Now, if you have a specific case that you would like to discuss, drop me a line in the comments or on LinkedIn or directly by mail, and I'll be glad to help you along with it. The most important part is in this video right here. Think about what you are measuring and why you want to know. That will inform which of these tools are best suited for you. And quite often, especially if you're investigating your process, you want to calculate all 6 of them, because that will give you a good insight into where my variation is originating, what is causing it, or at least when is it caused. So I hope that this clarified things a bit more for you. Hit the like button if it did. Ask your questions in the comments below. And for now, I wish you the best of luck setting up your process capability metrics. And as always, don't forget to also enjoy the continuous improvement journey.